We're a medical market research company. We work internationally conducting primary market research, and we work with all sorts of different people, including clinicians and patients. In particular, we've got a special interest in working with the rare disease community. Kind of started off with a personal interest because there's a little girl that lived near me with a disease called Niemann-Pick C. And I got involved with the charity, and I've had a personal interest in that charity for many years. So through my market research company, we've sort of decided to specialise with rare disease patients. We've set up a patient group that runs through Facebook that's steadily growing. And that's just for rare disease patients to sort of connect with each other, to share their stories. There's so many different rare diseases, but there's a lot of common threads in the experience that people have with their sort of pathway to diagnosis, feelings of isolation, not knowing who to talk to. So it's a nice community, and there's a lot of people sharing their stories. Very passionate to develop the community. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you today and understand a little bit about your story and the work that you do. I'd like to start off by saying congratulations for being 10 years in remission this year. And it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience as a patient with a serious and rare illness, and how that shaped your work and your mission.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for spending some time chatting with me today. My name's David Fajgenbaum, and I first got into this world of rare disease research when I was a medical student at the University of Pennsylvania. I wanted to become a doctor and treat cancer patients in memory of my mom. She had passed away from cancer just a few years before. And I was well on my way. I had actually done a year of graduate school in England, and was my third year of medical school when out of nowhere, I personally became critically ill. My liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow, my heart, my lungs, they all began to shut down. I had a retinal hemorrhage that made me temporarily blind in my left eye. I needed transfusions and dialysis, all these different medical technologies to keep me alive. And I was so sick that a doctor told my family I wasn't going to survive. And then a priest read me my last rites. And I was 25 years old at the time. And
Wow.
Around that time was when I was finally diagnosed with a disease called Castleman disease, a rare disease where your immune system attacks and shuts down your vital organs. And with the diagnosis, I thought was going to come all these answers. Okay, we finally know what it is that's trying to kill me. There must be a treatment for it. And I learned there were no approved treatments, but there was one experimental drug that was undergoing clinical trials. So I got that drug, but unfortunately it didn't work for me. So I needed a bunch of chemotherapy over the course of multiple years just to keep me alive before I decided that I was going to take on this mission of maybe trying to find a drug for my disease, and started a foundation called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, and have really made it my life's mission.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And what happened? So you said you were trying to find a cure for the Castleman's disease. So what happened with that? How did that progress?
Sure. So through the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, we sort of we did two things that I think were really quite innovative. One is that we decided that we weren't just going to raise money and then hope that the right researcher applied for the right project at the right time, which is sort of typically how research is done for rare diseases. We said, okay, we're going to connect with physicians, researchers, and patients, and we're going to ask them what research should be done. And then we're going to go out and we're going to find the best researcher in the world to do those studies, and we're going to fund them, we're going to give them samples. And so it's sort of like a way to go from this sort of reactive model to a proactive model. And we call it the collaborative network approach because it's really all about collaboration and working together. So that was one thing. We said, okay, we're going to do this in a collaborative, this collaborative network approach. The other thing we said was, we don't have $1 billion in 10 years to create a new drug from scratch. If we want to make a difference, a meaningful difference for patients in the near term that can maybe help me and other patients with my disease, we're going to need to get involved in drug repurposing, meaning we're going to need to figure out what is going wrong in the disease and then see, is there a drug that already exists for another disease that could be repurposed for my disease? And that second realization, or the second sort of decision, was based on the realization that those chemotherapies I got that saved my life, they weren't made for Castleman disease, but they worked to save my life. And so it was like, well, wait a minute, are there other drugs like these chemotherapies that could actually save my life? And the chemo didn't work long term, but it clearly worked in the short term. And I also learned that there were drugs that were made for Castleman disease that were being used for other diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. And I was like, well, wait a minute, if a Castleman's drug can be used for rheumatoid arthritis, maybe there's a rheumatoid arthritis drug that can be used for Castleman's, right? And so that's what our second thing was, is to really focus on drug repurposing and from building the collaborative approach and then pursuing drug repurposing. About 3 years into my journey with Castleman's, I ended up discovering a drug called sirolimus, which was made for organ transplant rejection. I thought it could work for Castleman's, and I started testing it on myself as the first patient ever with Castleman disease to receive sirolimus. And as you said at the beginning of our conversation, January 5th marked 10 years in remission, and July 5th marks 10 and a half years in remission.
Wow, fantastic. That's fantastic. And then have you gone on to work with sort of repurposing other drugs for other diseases from there?
We have, yeah. So
Yeah.
once I started using sirolimus on myself and it started working, I was like, oh my gosh, this drug was always there and no one was using it. How many more drugs are there that are at pharmacy shelves that could help patients, but they're not being used? And so first we focused entirely on Castleman disease. I joined the faculty here at Penn, where I run a center focused on this. And focusing on Castleman's, we discovered other drugs like ruxolitinib and adalimumab, thalidomide, Velcade, that could be utilized for Castleman's patients. And as we did it more and more for Castleman's, it was again like, oh my gosh, these drugs are working so well for Castleman's patients.
Yeah.
What about other diseases? And so a few years ago, we started focusing on other conditions like pembrolizumab for angiosarcoma, etanercept for DATA2, a few different treatments for POEM syndrome. And amazingly, those drugs have started to help people and have been able to help people. And so with all of this in mind, the fact that I'm alive because of a repurposed drug, that we've been able to help people with Castleman's and other diseases with repurposed drugs, that's when we decided to start a nonprofit organization called Every Cure, because we realized the reason this wasn't happening was because there were some major systemic barriers that were really preventing repurposing from happening on its own. And so let's build a nonprofit to really address each of those barriers.
Okay, fantastic. And then I've seen something so the organization you set up is Every Cure, is it? Is that right?
That's right. Yep, Every Cure.
Yeah, and it says that you're using AI to find new uses for existing drugs. How does that work?
Sure. So, and maybe I'll even take a step back and share sort of those three hurdles, and AI comes in to clearly address one of them. So the first is that when you repurpose drugs that are already FDA approved or already EMA approved, those drugs have a very short window, or well, first, any drug that is approved has a very short window where it can still be profitable. But once it becomes generic, there's no profit that can be made off selling more cases. So drug repurposing is completely disincentivized because over 80% of drugs are already generic, and there's no incentive to repurpose an old, cheap generic drug. Even new drugs, there's not much of an incentive because pretty soon those new drugs are going to be old drugs and they're going to be off patent. So one, there's this major financial disincentive or lack of incentive. The second is that no organization anywhere in the world has said we're going to take on the responsibility of repurposing drugs. The EMA doesn't do this. The NIH doesn't do this. Pharma doesn't do this. You know, people work on a drug for a disease, and then they work on another drug for another disease, maybe the same drug for a different disease. But there's no one saying, well, what about all drugs and all diseases? Like, you know, can we match these better? And the third is that there's never been a database or a scoring system to match how likely every drug is to treat every disease. So enter AI, right? You know, and that's why AI is at the heart of Every Cure, is that we apply artificial intelligence algorithms to the world's biomedical knowledge. We've structured everything we know in the world about every drug, every disease, every gene into something called a biomedical knowledge graph. And then we apply AI algorithms to the world's knowledge and say, okay, AI algorithm, if we know that siltuximab treats Castleman disease and insulin is a treatment for diabetes, and we train the algorithm on known treatment relationships, we then release the algorithm or unleash the algorithm on the rest of the world's biomedical knowledge and ask for it to come up with predictions around how likely other drugs are to treat other diseases. And AI is incredibly good at picking up patterns. And so it looks for patterns of known treat relationships and then tries to find patterns that look similar for unknown treatment relationships.
Amazing. Okay. And sort of, so you set up the organisation Every Cure, and you're sort of working with the AI and everything. So who else is helping you on your journey with Every Cure? How are you?
We've built an amazing team. I co-founded Every Cure with Grant Mitchell and Tracy Sikora. Grant and I were actually medical school and business school roommates many years ago. Grant went on to start a few different healthcare companies and actually did consulting and worked for a company called Quantum Black, which is based in the UK. That was utilizing artificial intelligence for the purpose of drug discovery back in mid 2010s. And Tracy, who's been really at the leading edge of clinical trial design here at Penn, and three of us came together and said, we're going to start Every Cure. And started building out our team from the very beginning, but only recently have we really had the resources and funding to grow at the rate that we've needed to. So now we're we're up to about 25 team members that are part of Every Cure, with expertise from, really incredible tech expertise through drug development, through nonprofit operations and fundraising, and really have built out an incredible team, and also have some amazing partners. So groups like Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Lyda Hill Philanthropies, and then now the U.S. government are our major partners and funders.
Fantastic. Just thinking about sort of the patient's, experience for sort of patient side of having a rare disease. What would you say were the most common shared experiences that rare disease patients have that could be immediately addressed?
I think that all of us with rare diseases, we feel alone. We feel like, there aren't others dealing with the same thing as us, but it turns out there's actually a lot of us when you lump us together. Each rare disease is rare, but collectively we're really common. So I think there's an aspect of feeling like we're alone. I think there is an aspect of feeling like, no drug company is going to invest the time and resources needed into our little rare disease because we're too small, or, maybe it's not commercially viable. And I think that there's a sense that that maybe, my doctor that's relatively close to me may be able to treat me just as well as a doctor in another country or another part of the country. And I think that for all three of those things, I think that the third one in particular, I've learned that it actually sometimes the doctor that's closest to you isn't necessarily the best fit for you. It actually sometimes is worth driving to the world's expert or getting on a plane and traveling to the world's expert. So I think that even though we can sometimes feel like, well, no one really knows about my rare disease, so I might as well just see the person that's convenient. Even if the person who knows the most about rare disease knows just a little bit more than the person that you're seeing, I think it's worth seeing doctors who have expertise. I think in terms of loneliness, I think we need to connect more with other people within our rare disease, but also across rare diseases. I've learned a lot from other people with rare diseases that don't have my rare disease. And then in terms of pharmaceutical companies, I think that for the right fit, I think there are a lot of drug companies that are really interested in rare diseases and developing them. It's just a matter of finding the right fit between what products do they already have in their portfolio and how does your disease fit with those products. And so it's not that they don't want to develop it for rare disease, it just has to be a fit for the company. And so I think those are maybe, I'd say, three conceptions or misconceptions or senses that I think that that can all be changed.
Yeah, all those themes that you said, they've all come out, in our social media, and also I don't know if you've had a chance to see, but we've got a series of podcasts that we've put together called Rare Together, and they're just in discussions with patients and just talking about their story, how they got diagnosed and their experiences, and they're absolutely inspiring stories, all of them. They're all different, they're all unique, but they've got these common threads, just like you said. So yeah, from the perspective of market research, why do you think it's important for pharmaceutical companies and other companies to actually understand patient experience specifically?
I think it's so important. There are many examples in drug development where a clinical trial may not have met its primary endpoint, or maybe it did meet its primary endpoint, but it didn't have strong adoption because patients weren't involved in determining what's actually meaningful for the disease. I can share an example in Castleman disease. We had a company come to us with a drug that would be likely to correct one of about 10 problems in the disease, but very unlikely to correct the other 9 out of 10 problems. That one problem isn't really the main problem for the disease. And so it was an example where it just wasn't a good fit between what the company has and what we're doing. And so our community told the company, actually, we love your interest, but actually your product isn't likely a good fit for us. I think it's sometimes easier when it comes from us, the disease group, than when companies tell us, your disease isn't a good fit for us. But I think at the end of the day, we really need fit. And the only way to determine if it's a good fit is through a lot of communication and spending time together and understanding, how does it work? What are your priorities? What are your goals here? And the more time you spend together, then you can really understand if it's a good fit.
Yeah, fantastic. And just also for the patients that follow our social media, how can they find out more about your organisation and get involved?
Sure. They could go to everycure.org, and from there you can find our social media handles. Each of them is just Everycure. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If you look for Everycure, you can find us, and certainly go to our website, everycure.org. We are so excited about this opportunity to identify new uses for existing medicines. We're using AI to come up with the score for the likelihood of every drug to treat every disease. So all 3,000 drugs, all 22,000 human diseases. It's about 60 million computations that our algorithms run. And we are excited to utilize those scores to then say, okay, among all these possibilities of every drug versus every disease, which drug for what disease is the most promising opportunity to help people? And then we can move those forward. And so it may be that someone watching this, that your rare disease is the disease that has a great fit with an existing drug and we'll move forward. Or it may be that there isn't a perfect fit for us to move forward, but that we're going to generate the data and we'd be happy to share it with you. We're planning to make these scores available in the next 15 to 18 months. And so if you're a rare disease, part of a rare disease group, or have a rare disease, we will be sharing the scores, and it would be amazing if there's an opportunity in there that you're excited to partner on, or maybe you're already aware of a drug in the same way I'm on sirolimus, it's helping me. Maybe there's a drug you're on that's helping you, that's not approved for your disease. Go to everycure.org/insights, and you can let us know about how that drug's helping you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, David. We'll make sure we share all the details about Everycure on our Facebook page as well. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for spending time with me too. And thanks so much for everything you do for the rare disease community.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, David.